What is going on, everyone? This is Zach back here with another episode of Clutch Crew Sports. And here in today's episode, we are going to do a deep dive into a lot of key NFL analytics and statistics that are measured. So I'm really looking forward to this. We've never really done anything like this. So a lot of our episodes have been kind of recycled from last year with topics and themes and stuff. But this is a completely brand new idea. So we're going to be looking at the best and the worst teams at lots of different statistical categories. We have a much better LockBoard to present this week. So a lot more correct picks on the LockBoard, which is great. And then we will go around the hoop and talk about all the controversies going around the NBA right now, both on the court and off the court. So it should be a fun episode. I hope you guys enjoy. And now let me introduce you to the rest of the crew.
What is going on, guys? Eric, your ranting co-host here. Zach and mine's Jaguars had a ugly loss today that could have been a win against the Colts. A little disappointing there to not get that, but nevertheless, though, excited to be here for another episode of the podcast. And like Zach said, we got a lot to talk about, so hope you guys enjoy it.
And what is going on, guys? It's Connor, the co-host with the most, and just like the Jaguars had an ugly loss, the Steelers had an ugly tie, the first tie of the season that honestly should have been a win had it not been for two fumbles that took us out of field goal range. That hurt a lot, but, you know, who knows? We'll bounce back next week, hopefully, and, I actually, for once, again, I'm starting to get better at the LockBoard, thankfully, so, that's always a good thing. Things are looking up there because I was about ready to pack it in for the season and just try and do 5-pointers every week. Just say, screw it, go for broke. But thankfully I'm getting a little bit better, so might not have to do that.
Yeah, definitely. When we get to the LockBoard segment of the show, we will give an updated standings on how everybody's doing and take a look at that. But to begin, we're going to go around the shield and talk about the analytics and statistics and everything that I talked about earlier. So the way we're going to be doing this is I think we have a total of 8 different stats, and what we have done for simplicity is we've just taken the top 5 best teams and the top 5 worst teams at each of those areas. And we're just going to kind of compare how they're doing statistically versus how their records are. So we have, for reference, all the teams' records here to go back to and such. But really, we're going to be talking about which of these, you might hear on different media sources, like, oh, this is a really important thing. We're just going to be kind of looking at it and being like, does this match reality? Which of these matter more? And basically, how important are these? And it's one thing to just look at the numbers and stuff, but it's another thing also to look at the numbers and then compare it to what our eyes say and see if they really match up. So I'm really excited to do this, and we'll go ahead and start. These first two, by the way, don't have really any correlation, I think, between them, but the stuff that Eric and Connor are going to talk about are going to have some correlation to them. But the first one that I want to talk about, and also too, this is a little bit more of an outside the box sort of thing. So I'm not starting this with the most basic and, simple stat, but it's an interesting one, and it's average time of possession. So this is, straightforward as it sounds. The time of possession that you have the ball on offense per game. And these are averages too. All these stats are averages because some teams have had bye weeks, other teams haven't had bye weeks. So to make it fair for that, these are average stats. And so the top 5 teams for time of possession are the Ravens, the Broncos, the Titans, the Bills, and the Cardinals in that order. So what stands out to me the most about this is really the Broncos, because they're the team with the worst record on this list. They are, I believe, let me check, 5-5, which isn't bad. 5-5 is not a bad record, but it's also, you wouldn't think that 5-5 would be the second average time of possession. And I think this is really key. The teams that seem to be on this list are teams that can run the ball, like the Ravens and the Titans. But then you have the Bills who don't really run the ball either. So it's like, I don't know. It's kind of weird that the Bills show up fourth on this list. But obviously, time of possession is a good thing. Every team wants to have time of possession to control the game, that sort of stuff. But for me, it's not a super great stat to look at, just because I feel like a lot of times teams can score quick. You can see a high-powered offense who scores in only a couple plays. They're not going to show up on time of possession. And then also, too, you can see teams that have big leads in the first half, and then they kind of maybe take their foot off the gas in the second half. They don't have the ball as long. So it's not super big, but also, too, you do see some really good teams on the top five. The bottom five, for reference, are the Seahawks at 32, the Eagles at 31, the Jaguars at 30, Texans at 29, Jets at 28. And this makes sense. The bottom of the time of possession makes sense. Jaguars, Texans, Jets, those are all really bad teams. The Eagles, their offense has struggled at points, and the Seahawks as well. And, mainly with Russell Wilson being out. If Russell Wilson hadn't been injured, they wouldn't be 32nd in time of possession. But this is the bottom of this makes a lot more sense to me. I think teams that have very, very low time of possession are going to be bad, just because lots of 3 and outs probably associated with this. Lots of punts, lots of 3 and outs, lots of turnovers. That's another thing too. If you turn the ball over a lot, you're going to have the ball less. So that makes sense. The bottom of the teams here makes sense.
Sorry, that kind of sounded like a Booger McFarland thing there. Like, if you turn the ball over, you're not going to have the ball anymore.
Oh, God, I just did a booger. Oh, no. Cut. And so the next stat that I have here to look at is another sort of, off the wall sort of thing. It's not like unheard of, people talk about this, but it's not number one, I think. And that's penalty yards per game. So I'll just go ahead and say the top 5. This is the top 5 best in penalty yards. So these are the teams that get the least amount of penalty yards per game. Number 1, the Bengals. Number 2, the Packers. Number 3, the Colts. Number 4, the Rams. And number 5, the Seahawks. So Seahawks just came up as 32nd in time of possession, but they're fifth best in penalty yards. And the most interesting thing in the top 5 here to me is the Bengals at 1, just because they've had that reputation, I think, as like a dirty team. And so I would have expected them to have a lot more penalty yards. Maybe not, be in the bottom 5, but number 1 was shocking to me that the Bengals were number 1, because with penalty yards and this stat, I correlate this to discipline. This is, a lot of times you can be like, oh, I got screwed. This team got screwed by the refs here. They got screwed by the refs there. But usually that's just for one play. It's usually just one play. Oh, dang, that shouldn't have been a pass interference or something like that. And that's just 15 yards or whatever it ends up being. But for penalty yards at this point in the season, this is truly showing the teams that have discipline and the teams that don't. And to me, this is, I would think, a more important stat than the time of possession one. And the teams you see on here, for the most part, are good, except the Seahawks. Like, you have the Rams and the Packers. The Colts are pretty average. The Bengals are doing pretty good, but we're still unsure of them. Seahawks don't look to be that good, but this is big. I mean, just as someone that's watched a lot of Jaguars games, just seeing the effect of penalties, extending drives for the other teams on offense, getting big plays, getting touchdowns taken back by penalties. They're a big deal. I really think penalties are a big deal. And this is where it gets real interesting when we look at the bottom 5. So at 32nd, we have the Buccaneers. At 31st, we have the 49ers. At 30th are the Bills. 29th are the Vikings. And then 28 are the Browns. So this is where it gets real interesting, because you see some good teams are the most penalized teams. And I do think this really matters. I think the Bucs, if they're going to win another Super Bowl and go back to back, they have to improve this stat probably more than any other on their team. They can't, no team that's going to be 32nd, I think, will win the Super Bowl with penalties. The 49ers are bad. The Vikings are average. The Bills, it's another case with the Bucs. You can be great in offense, you can be great in scoring, you can have a great defense, all this, but it's so hard to win when you commit so many penalties, and it's a discipline thing. I think this is an area where it's like you can't improve upon. You just have to, have a better discipline, which is shocking for some of these teams like the Bucs, Bills, some of these veteran teams here. And then the Browns too, that's the team that I've been talking about all season long. Like, oh, the Browns are gonna do this, Browns are gonna do that. But it's not that surprising to me to see them here. Like, I still think the Browns are kind of a youngish team, and they have definitely they have to clean penalties up. So I think penalties matter quite a bit, and that's why I wanted to include them on the list. And it's really interesting to see which teams are in the top 5 and the bottom 5, because I wouldn't have guessed it for a lot of them. But yeah, so that's time of possession and penalty yards per game. And now I'll hand it off to Connor to talk about total yards. Sorry, I was trying to remember who was talking about it, but Connor's going to talk about total yards per game on offense and total yards allowed per game on defense.
Yeah, so, these are two stats that, Zach was mentioning that, you don't really hear about time of possession or, penalty yardage as much. These are two stats you hear every single time, like total yards per game on offense and how many yards allowed on defense. So, if you look at the total yards per game on offense, from 1 to 5, we have the Dallas Cowboys at the top, followed by the Baltimore Ravens, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the LA Rams, and the Arizona Cardinals. No real surprises on this list. These are teams that they have great offenses. They're at the top of their divisions. They all have an MVP candidate. Like Lamar Jackson, Tom Brady, Matthew Stafford, Kyler Murray, are all in the MVP conversation. Dak Prescott's not been thrown in there as much, but I would certainly consider him to be somewhat part of that conversation. So no real surprises here. Obviously, you have to be able to put up points on offense if you want to be able to, win games. That's another Booger McFarland thing. You have to have points to win games. But yeah, it just shows, like, especially, getting yards per game, I think the big thing with this too is that, you see that this kind of, I think in my mind, goes a little hand in hand with average time of possession, because, I think those quick strike offenses, they tend to not, have as many yards. They kind of get like these big chunk plays, and then the rest of the time they're kind of sputtering. I think the Chiefs are probably a good example of that right now. It's like, you see them come out and they'll come out and, have a bunch of 3 and outs, or, have like 1 first down drives, but then all of a sudden, like 75-yard touchdown pass to Tyreek Hill, like, or something like that will happen. So it's really important to be able to put up yards on offense, especially when you look on the other side. For the least yards per game, you have the Houston Texans, then the Chicago Bears, followed by the Miami Dolphins, followed by the Seattle Seahawks, and then the New Orleans Saints, which the Saints are definitely a surprise on this list for me. The other 4 teams are all pretty bad. The Texans, Dolphins, Seahawks especially, and the Bears, obviously, with a new offense, they're struggling. But the Saints, in my opinion, is definitely an interesting one, given that, the 5-4 record they have, that they're actually a decent team, especially given, I guess you can kind of accrue that to injuries at the moment. I would have loved to have seen where they would have been earlier in the season when everyone was healthy, when they had, Jameis and, Alvin Kamara didn't play this week against Tennessee. And, obviously they have some issues when it comes to depth at the wide receiver position. So seeing them down here is really interesting, but it makes no surprise to me that, the Texans, and I think another common theme that you see with a lot of at least the first 3 teams, I mean, you can even throw the Saints in here too, is that, like, kind of new offenses. The Texans, they don't have, they've been switching around quarterbacks all year due to injury problems. Justin Fields is a new quarterback in the league. Tua, even though it's his second year in the league, they're still trying to figure out that offense down there. And then obviously with the Saints, with all the changes they've been going through with Jameis Winston, and then Jameis Winston getting hurt, and then Trevor Siemian coming in, and blah, 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 blah. The only one that surprises me here really is, I guess this is equated to, again, like Zach mentioned earlier with Russell Wilson being hurt. I don't think the Seahawks would be down here if Russell Wilson was playing. Normally they're a much better offensive team than defensive team. But, it's interesting to see them down here too. But it's definitely, again, very important. So then you go to total yards allowed per game. Now, these are the top defenses in the league. And that is the number one defense right now for yards allowed is the Buffalo Bills, followed by the Carolina Panthers, then the Cleveland Browns, followed by the Arizona Cardinals, and then the Green Bay Packers, which the Green Bay Packers are probably the most surprising on this list to me, given, again, like another team that has a history of not playing great defense. So really goes to show how well the Packers have improved that area of their game. They managed to shut out the Seahawks today with Russell Wilson back. So, it shows a major improvement. It's definitely, we say it all the time, at least I say it all the time, and I truly believe that defense wins championships. So, these are the teams that are going to compete for it. But it still is interesting to see, you have the Panthers and the Browns on here, teams that are, kind of average teams. The Browns currently sitting in last in the AFC North. The Panthers are sitting in third in the NFC South. So it's not all top teams here. Although I will say this for me, when you're looking at yards allowed, I hear this term get thrown around a lot. And to me, I wish people would talk more about points per game than they do yards per game, because I've seen a lot of times where, you have these teams that they'll give up probably around 300 or so yards per game, but they're only giving up something like 14 points a game, which is fantastic. Because normally you would think, oh, okay, if you're giving up 350, 400 yards a game, you're also probably giving up like 25 points a game, but that's not always the case. So I think it's really important to look at points per game as a bigger factor. And also, this is another stat that I think in some ways can really go hand in hand with time of possession, because teams that can hold on to the ball, they're going to be better in this section of, yards allowed per game, because, the less the other team has the ball, the less yards they're going to get. So, and also the less tired your defense is going to be. I saw this a lot last year with the Steelers. The offense could never get anything going. They were always going 3 and out and punting. And even though that defense was spectacular and full of Pro Bowlers, you're not going to hold someone back forever. So it's really important to have that. And then especially, again, if you look at the other side of the coin, you've got the New York Jets with the worst in yards allowed per game. Then the Seattle Seahawks showing up the bottom 5 of yards per game on offense and yards allowed on defense. Probably goes to show you why they're at the bottom of the NFC West. Then followed by the Washington football team, the Houston Texans, the same as the Seahawks in both categories, and the Minnesota Vikings at number 5. Kind of strange, again, with Mike Zimmer being supposedly a defensive guru, and his defense is once again bottom 5 in the league in yards allowed. So I think the big takeaway, like I said, from this category, though, is still just, I try not to put too much emphasis on yards allowed per game, because I want to look more at points per game. Because those are the teams that really are going to be. I would totally believe that if you looked at this thing and you saw teams that are, points allowed per game, there might be a rare exception here or there, but it definitely would line up, almost perfectly. I would think would be the top teams versus the bottom teams. So you'd probably have like the Rams and, well, I don't know if you'd have the Rams up here, but, you would have the Bills and the Cardinals and, those teams still in there. But I don't think some of these other teams would still be in here. So definitely 2 very interesting stats, offense, defense, they're important as always. But now I'm going to let Eric go on with his 2 categories.
Yeah, so kind of Connor talked about the total yards per game. I'm going to be breaking down even more detail within that stat. I'm going to be comparing the passing yards per game and the rushing yards per game. And if you take a look at both of these stats, I mean, obviously with the NFL being, I agree with Connor that defense wins championships. I'm definitely more of a defensive minded guy. If I was a coach, that would be my route. But the NFL is more of an offensive driven league. So we obviously have to take a look at these stats, and you can obviously tell if you're looking at on YouTube. I mean, generally the teams with the most passing yards per game and rushing yards per game, for the most part, are generally more of the better teams in the league, whereas the teams that are in the bottom are more of the worst teams in the league. With a few exceptions, of course. But so taking a look at the passing yards per game here, at number one we got Tampa, the Buccaneers. Number two, you got the Raiders. Number three, the Rams. Number four, the Cowboys. And number five, the Chargers. And while I don't know if I would have guessed these five exactly, if I had were to try to guess before going into the episode, but at the same time, none of these five teams on this list really surprised me. I mean, with the Bucks, obviously you've got Brady and all the weapons that he has on that team. That's no surprise. The Raiders going into the season, it's a little bit of a surprise, but Derek Carr was looking like an MVP candidate after those first few games. While the Raiders have been kind of falling apart a little bit, their passing offense is still pretty good. The Rams, Cooper Kupp's been lighting it up this year, and they've got Matthew Stafford now over Jared Goff, so that's no surprise. And with the Cowboys having Dak back, that's no surprise. And Justin Herbert's been the Chargers have fallen off a little bit, but Justin Herbert's still been killing it for the most part. So I'm not really surprised here. Whereas, you go and look at the bottom five, you got the Bears. I think Zach was telling me before we came on the air that they were only going into this week, they were only averaging like 120 yards passing per game, which is just insane. That sounds like a stat that would have been the case in like the 1960s or something. Like, just the fact that their passing offense has been that bad is just crazy. But then you got the Saints second. Not necessarily surprised with them either, just with, Winston was struggling and now he's hurt, and, they're relying on Trevor Siemian now. Houston, Davis Mills has just been bad, and Sam Darnold for Carolina, they're the fourth worst. And Jalen Hurts has struggled in Philly. And you take a look at, these top five teams versus the bottom five teams, and you compare their records. And for the most part, you can clearly see the difference. Where some of these other ones with like, time of possession and penalty yards and things like that, there's some teams where it's like, well, they're doing really good, it makes sense they'd be here, or this seems really bad, it's a surprise they're here. Especially with the NFL just being a pass happy league, it's no surprise that that's how this has gone. And then with the rushing yards per game, this one's a little bit different. You got Cleveland at number one, and I'm pretty sure the Titans would have been number one if Derrick Henry wasn't hurt. But, you see Cleveland, though, despite how good their rushing game is, their passing game has not been very good lately. And you can tell that, that's obviously affecting their record. Whereas, you got the Ravens at number two on the rushing game, and they were number two in total yards per game as well. But it does seem like teams are starting to key in on Lamar Jackson a little more. They're starting to figure him out a little bit. He hasn't been as hot here lately. So it's a wonder, if the rushing yards are going to be enough here. And then you got Dallas at number three. They're in the top five in both passing and rushing. And yeah, they've probably got the number one offense overall. Yeah, they got the number one total yards per game. I'm sure their points per game is probably number one as well. But you can see how that factors into their total stats. And then the Titans and Colts at 4 and 5. We know Zach and I, as Jags fans, know that these two teams like to run the ball. With obviously Derrick Henry's hurt now, but him and Jonathan Taylor for the Colts. So these are the top five offenses. Whereas at the bottom five, you got the Dolphins at number one. Their run game has been non-existent. The Texans, and just like with total yards per game and allowed per game, they're in the bottom five on both of these. And then you got the Jets, Falcons, and Steelers like rounding it out. The only one that's really a surprise here to me is the Steelers, just because Najee Harris has been having a pretty good season. So I am a little surprised that the Steelers were in the bottom five in rushing. That's really the only surprise here that stands out to me. So, but in saying all this, for me, it's not necessarily that passing yards per game is more important or rushing yards per game is more important. For me, the best thing is just having a balanced offense. You look at Dallas being in the top 5 in both, which obviously that's an exception to the rule. But, when you're a defense and you're trying to figure out, how you're going to game plan against an offense, when there's, any given situation and you don't know if the offense is going to run the ball or if they're going to pass the ball, that makes it so much more dangerous versus a team that's pass heavy and you pretty much know no matter what, they're going to throw it other than occasionally running it. Or if it's a run heavy team like Cleveland, like, you can stack the box, and if you can stop the run, then you can probably stop them. So, like I said, I don't necessarily view passing yards or rushing yards per game as one is more important than the other. You just want to be balanced, be in the middle. That's the key for me. So Zach's going to take over for the last two. We've got sacks per game and turnover differential. So I'll let Zach take it away.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start with the sacks per game stat. And, granted, out of all this one is definitely, I think, probably out of all the stats, the least valuable to look at as far as like how good teams are going or not, because I'll just go ahead and read you the top 5 best sacks per game. You have the Rams at number 1, the Vikings at number 2, Browns at 3, Bears at 4, and Cardinals at 5. And so you have the Rams and the Cardinals on this list on the top 5, which makes sense. Chandler Jones, Aaron Donald, and the Rams defense, like 2 good defenses. But then you have the Bears on here, and we've just talked about how bad the Bears were on offense and everything, and the Bears don't have a great record. So it's kind of funny that the Bears show up in the top 5 on this portion of the list. But it goes to show you that I think with sacks per game, the bigger concern is not to be in the bottom. And I'll get to the bottom teams in a minute, but obviously it's great to have sacks, but also too, there's things like, quarterback pressures and hits and, there's different metrics and stuff than just sacks. Cause there's times you can pressure the quarterback and not necessarily get sacks. And teams that quarterbacks that you play also has a big impact on this as well. So sacks per game, very specific category to look at. Top of the list doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. I'll get to the bottom of the list now. So at 32nd, you have the Falcons. 31st is interesting. You have the Chiefs at 31st. 30th, Seahawks. They're, on this list a million times. And then the Lions go up. The only team that hasn't won a game, the Lions, they're finally showing up on the stats list here in the bottom. And then the Jaguars you have next. So this is where I think it's important not to be on the bottom of this list. Like I said before, I think it's more important not to be at the bottom because, sacks are definitely important. Like, there's everybody knows that, but this is just, I think, an indicator of a bad defense if you're not getting sacks. Like, it means you have a bad pass rush. And it's probably meaning you're giving up a lot of total yards if you're not getting sacks. I think really that's what this is indicative of. Not a good pass rush, giving up a lot of yards, giving up a lot of points, which I think everybody would say these 5 defenses are really, really bad. Falcons, Chiefs, Seahawks, Lions, and Jaguars. So that's my thoughts on the sacks per game. And then turnover differential is an interesting one. And some people I think would say this is the most important. I think most everybody would have turnover differential in other than points, which, is obviously points. It goes record then points, basically, like they're hand in hand. But when you look past points and record, turnover differential, I think, comes up very high for a lot of people. Number 1, you have the Bills. Number 2, you have the Colts. Number 3, the Cardinals. Number 4, the Packers. And number 5, the Vikings. So the Vikings, again, they're an odd case. Like, they show up on 2nd for sacks. They show up on 5th for turnover differential. But then you have them in the bottom categories on like penalties and total yards allowed. So it's really weird to see them in the bottom on total yards allowed, but they have a really good turnover differential, really good at sacks per game, and yet the Vikings record, let me take a look real quick, is 4-5. So, that kind of shows you, okay, there's some outliers here. Like, this is not going to perfectly align with the standings. But I do think it's very, very important. I mean, all these other teams, the Colts, I think the reason why the Colts are on here is they're just, honestly, I'm a little surprised with the way Carson Wentz is at quarterback. That's surprising to me. I guess their defense just gets a lot of turnovers, which they do have a good defense. That makes sense. Jonathan Taylor doesn't fumble as much, so you really just have to worry about the Carson Wentz interceptions. But the other teams, they make sense to me, especially with how they've been doing this season. And I do think there was a pretty big gap for the Bills. I believe they had a pretty big lead on first place on that. The bottom 5 teams, again, kind of similar with the sacks per game here with some of these. You have the Jets at 32nd, the worst. You have the Jaguars at 31st, Chiefs at 30th, 49ers at 29th, and then the Ravens at 28th. So this is interesting because you have 2 projected playoff teams, the Chiefs and the Ravens, and the bottom 5 on turnover differential. I think it can be, the Jaguars and Jets can be explained. Rookie quarterbacks turning the ball over a lot, bad defenses. I think it's no surprise to anybody that they are 32nd and 31st. Chiefs, total shock to everybody that they'd be here at this point. But then again, it makes sense with their record. Like, it's honestly kind of surprising that the Chiefs have as good of a record as they do when you look at this stat. And you also see the Chiefs didn't come up in the top 5 on any of the offensive stats that Eric and Connor talked about earlier. So that just shows you the Chiefs' offense is down this year, and their turnover differential is, I think, a big reason why their offense is down. Defense not forcing the turnovers, offense, uncharacteristically turning the ball over a lot. 49ers have just been a mess all year, I think. Ravens, that's an odd one, but looking at the turnover differential as a whole, I think this one, looking at this versus looking at the standings, I think it's a little overrated, honestly. I think it's a little overrated, and I'll just check with Connor and Eric real quick about this to see if they agree with me or not. Connor, how about you?
I don't necessarily think that I agree with you on that. Like, I know there's going to be outliers, like with the Vikings, but with the Ravens, I know obviously they're still 6-3, but with that turnover differential, like, they've definitely had like a couple games this year that they should have lost, and it was basically like they were playing horrible for the whole game, and then all of a sudden they managed to get some rally going at the end and fix their problems. Like, I was actually talking to we have our podcast fantasy league, and I was talking to Caleb in there. I was talking with the Ravens. Like, literally, they only have like 2 really impressive wins this year. They've got the win over the Broncos and the win over the Chargers, which were really good. But other than that, like, you have a loss to the Raiders. You have the Chiefs game that, like, honestly, like, the Chiefs choked that away. Then you have the Colts game where the Colts choked that away as well. Then they got destroyed by the Bengals. The Vikings, who also choked their game away, the loss to the Dolphins, and then, of course, the massive, massive bailout they got from Justin Tucker in the game against the Lions. I'm not sure anyone else in the league would kick a 66-yard field goal. So and also, like, so the same thing with the Chiefs. Like, these are 2 teams that, in my mind, very easily, instead of being, like 6-3, 5-4, could be like 3-6, and the Chiefs could be like 3-6 as well. So I don't necessarily think it's overrated, because I know it's just like turning the ball over is just really terrible in football. Like, I know, and even so, if you can, I think creating turnovers is like the more you can get on defense, I think is honestly more important, because it's one of those things that you can create a turnover and all of a sudden, like, your fortune changes in the worst possible scenario. Like, this isn't pro, but I've seen it happen in college before a lot with Appalachian State. They're one of those defenses that, like, I see it a lot all the time where they'll let this team march down the field and get down into the red zone, and then all of a sudden they come up with like an interception in the end zone, and then they get the ball back, and the other team comes away with no points. So turnovers are very important, and then like App State will go down and score a touchdown off of that turnover. So that's a 14-point swing right there. So I honestly don't think it's that overrated. I do, like I said, I agree that there's outliers, but I think it's one of the most. I would be up there with, like you said, those people that think it's one of the most important stats in football. I don't know what Eric thinks, if he agrees with me or agrees with Zach.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you, Connor. You pretty much hit the nail on the head. So I don't really have much else to add, but I agree with you. I think it's very important.
For sure. I definitely think it's important. I'm not saying it's
yeah.
No,
you're
not saying you don't think it's not important. You just think it's a little overrated.
Exactly. So yeah, that's where I stand on it, and so that's just a small portion, guys. When I was doing this research, there's so many things. There's like Connor was talking about points per game. There's a big stat out there called points per 100 yards, which kind of I know it combines the points and the yards. So it's real interesting. If you want to do some research, you just type in NFL 21 stats, you'll see everything.
Well, I will say too, if you really want to do research into stats, you can always come up with some crazy stat. It seems like these networks always seem to be able to come up with something like that. They'll flash a graphic on the screen like, oh, this is the first time someone has thrown for 300 yards when it's, been a
when
outside,
the wind is over 15 miles an hour.
When the wind is over 15 miles an hour and it's a slight drizzle and, the team in November, right? So, they always come up with these crazy stats that you're just like, where in the world did you pull that out of? Like,
exactly. So it's maybe people have just too much time on their hand with this. I don't know, but the NFL is a big deal, so there's a lot going on. Let's go ahead and now transition to the games of the week preview. So as usual, we pick 3 games of the week that we think are the most interesting to look at out of the next week's schedule. And I will go ahead and start with the first one. We have the Colts at the Bills. So this is a rematch of the playoff game from last year. That was a crazy wild card playoff game. Phillip Rivers' last game ever played, Bills and the Colts. And as a Jaguars fan, actually, we've seen these 2 teams as our last 2 opponents, which is kind of interesting. The Bills are the home team here. I'm going to pick the Bills to win. My problem with the Colts is I think they're just too one-dimensional of a team, too Jonathan Taylor centric, which he's a very good running back. I know firsthand he's a very good running back. They have a great offensive line, but other than Michael Pittman, the Colts really have no outside weapons. I mean, T.Y. Hilton is out of it. He's not in his prime anymore. They don't really have great tight end. I wouldn't say they have any athletic, good tight ends. And Carson Wentz, he makes games, or he has plays in every game where it's like, this could be a turnover. Bills, very opportunistic defense. I'd be shocked if they don't get 2 or 3 turnovers on the Colts. And the Bills offense, they got to beat up on the Jets this week, but they're coming back to life. So I think pretty easily the Bills are going to win this game. I will go ahead and say Bills 28, Colts 13. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I just think I think their offenses are similar. I mean, obviously the Bills are pass heavy, Colts are run heavy. They both have their own strengths like that, but I think the biggest thing is the Bills. I mean, obviously, that sounded stupid. I realize they're similar, but that was my booger moment, I guess. But anyway, I think the Bills' defense is definitely better, and I just expect the Bills to win pretty easily. I'm going to agree with Zach here. I'm going to say 31-17. How about you, Connor?
So I do think the Bills are going to win, but I don't think it's going to be an easy win. Just because when you always look at the Bills defense, you look at the one weakness of this Bills defense. It's always been the run defense. I mean, they let Derrick Henry's obviously Derrick Henry, but they let him run for almost 150 yards and 3 touchdowns on them. And, the Colts, like Jonathan Taylor he's kind of like that step below Derrick Henry now. Like, he's definitely a top 5 running back in the league. And, the Colts like to run. But I do think what's going to hold the Colts back, obviously, is going to be the differential with the quarterbacks. Carson Wentz is a worse quarterback than Ryan Tannehill. And like you said, at least the Titans for them, like they have weapons in the receiving game. They have A.J. Brown. Julio Jones played in that game against the Bills. And Derrick Henry was a weapon out of the backfield too. Really, with the Colts, it's just not even really Michael Pittman. It's like just kind of Jonathan Taylor out of the backfield, I think, is their main receiving threat there. So I do think the Bills are going to win. It'll be close, and I think Josh Allen's going to have some struggles against this Colts defense, but I would say Bills are probably going to win 28-24.
All right.
All right.
And
Sorry.
I was just setting you up, man. I'm setting you up.
Appreciate that, man. Appreciate that.
Yep. So later on, 4 o'clock window, we have the Dallas Cowboys and the Kansas City Chiefs. So I'll let Eric go ahead and talk about that one.
Yeah, so Susan was obviously very happy with the Cowboys' performance, beating up on the Falcons. And I don't expect them to have that amazing of a performance again, but I do expect them to beat the Chiefs. It is going to be tough going into Arrowhead. That's a tough stadium to play in. And, if the Chiefs offense gets hot, they can be hard to stop. But the problem is the Chiefs offense has been really inconsistent this year. They've been really up and down. Whereas Dallas's offense, other than that Denver game, has been amazing. And then the Chiefs' defense is bad, whereas Dallas's defense has been pretty good for the most part this year. So just looking at every level like that, I think Dallas should win the game. I don't necessarily think it'll be easily, but I think they're going to win. I think Patrick Mahomes will make a couple more mistakes, and that'll give Dallas some opportunities. And maybe Trayvon Diggs will get yet another interception. So I'm gonna go Dallas 27, Chiefs 20. Zach, I'll let you go next.
All right, I am gonna pick the Chiefs in this one. I'll say 37-34. I think the Chiefs are going to have a bit of a rebound offensively from how they've been doing prior. Still got all those weapons. Tyreek Hill's a beast. They've got Kelsey. And I think also, too, the Cowboys are good, but I don't know. I just feel like they're going to be – I just sense a step back with the Cowboys for whatever reason this week. I think for whatever reason, I just think it's going to happen. I think the Chiefs are surprisingly going to have a good game on defense. I think the Cowboys aren't as much. I do think the Chiefs will get out to a big lead, and the Cowboys will make a comeback. I'll say final score 37-34, but it won't feel as close. It'll feel more like the Chiefs' big win and the Cowboys coming back late like they did a lot last year. Connor, what about you?
So I'm going to agree with Eric and go with the Cowboys here. I do agree that I think the Chiefs offense will be better. I mean, they're already looking better tonight against the Raiders. So, I think they're going to start to try and find that groove again, but I don't see any way that this Chiefs defense is going to be able to stop Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, and all those weapons on the Dallas offense. So it'll be high scoring. I'm going to say Dallas wins 35-31.
All right, then we have a Sunday night game that I know Connor is going to be very interested in watching. We have the Steelers at the Chargers, but I think most people would predict more Steelers fans than Chargers fans at this game. I've seen in the past Steelers Chargers games in LA. I've seen how that's looked before in the stands, but I'll go ahead and let Connor break this matchup down and see if he's got his favorite team winning.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice to rebound from a tie against Detroit. I mean, there was obviously a lot of things going into the tie with Detroit. I mean, Roethlisberger obviously found out yesterday that he had COVID, so he should be back for the game, though, because he is vaccinated, so all he needs is 2 negative tests in 24 hours, and he should be good to go. But, in that game against Detroit, it'll be interesting to see. I want to see if the Steelers can get healthy for this game because there were a lot of injuries happening in that game on both sides. Like TJ Watt had a little bit of a hip injury. Joe Hayden had a little bit of a foot injury. 2 of the offensive linemen for the Steelers got hurt. So it's going to be really key to, use this and be able to rest and heal up. Obviously, bonus side of playing in LA is you're not going to have to worry about, crappy weather conditions like there were today as well. It's going to be, SoFi Stadium's indoors for the most part. So there's going to be none of that going on. But I do think, this Chargers offense has been struggling recently. Like Justin Herbert, he had a really monster start to the season, but I don't know. It seems like he's just making like rookie mistakes, stuff that he was making last year. And he's just, I feel like he's taking a step back. Austin Eckler, they haven't been able to get the run game going because they've been having to play from behind. And obviously with this Steelers defense, you don't want to play from behind. The strength of this team is the secondary. And obviously, TJ Watt's going to be coming after Justin Herbert. So I'm going to say, and with Ben Roethlisberger coming back, I think they're going to be able to expose this Chargers defense a little bit. It's a little bit on the weaker side. So I think Najee Harris will be able to carve them up, and Roethlisberger, he won't be making some of the horribly inaccurate throws that Mason Rudolph was making today. So I am going to take the Steelers. I think as customary with Steelers games this year, I think it's going to be low scoring. But I'm going to have the Steelers winning 21-17. Zach, what about you?
Yeah, I'm surprisingly going to agree with you on this one. I've got the Steelers winning. Like you said, I think Big Ben coming back, I think will mean a big difference for him. And like you said with the Chargers, it's a trend thing. This league is up and down right now. The Chargers seem like they're down on offense. Like we might have cursed them a little while back when we talked about how amazing their offense was and everything. Now they've hit a wall. And the Steelers still have a good defense, obviously. I think even with the injuries that Connor mentioned, like they're good enough as a defense to survive, a few injuries. So I'm really curious to see how this game goes. I think it's going to be close. I will go ahead and say, no one predicts this number a lot, but let's go 22, the score 22 to maybe 15, some weird score like that.
I'm like, how would you even begin to get to that?
I don't know.
Nice.
I don't know. Leave that to your imagination. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, I'm just going to agree with you guys here. If this game was being played in like week 3 or 4 or something, when the Steelers were off to a slow start and the Chargers were hot, I'd say the Chargers would win easily. But yeah, the trend is favored more in Pittsburgh's direction lately. And, like Connor said, if it weren't for a bunch of crazy things and that bad weather, like Pittsburgh probably beats Detroit today. So I'm going to go with low scoring as well. I'm going to say Pittsburgh wins 17-13.
All right. And let's move on to the LockBoard now. So, like I said at the start of the show, a lot better of a LockBoard week all around the board, which when you see the current week points, you might not think so, but from where we were a couple weeks ago, it's big improvement. So I ended up getting 4 points this week. Eric got 3, Connor got 5, and Nate got 0. So Nate with 0 points going to be picking first in the next week's LockBoard. And now looking at the total standings, this is obviously, the more important side of things. But, we're narrowing up still. I am in first place with 38. Eric in second with 36. Nate in third with 31. And Connor in fourth with 29. So that's the total standings as of right now. Still not a large gap, in all honesty, between fourth and first. And let's look at the LockBoard picks from this past week. And Eric, you had the first pick. I'll let you go ahead and tell us what you got right, what you got wrong.
Yeah, I had another decent week this week. Not a great week, but a decent week. So I'll take it. But my first pick really bummed me out since I had the first pick overall. Yeah, I got first choice of any game I wanted. I really thought Cleveland was going to beat New England today. I felt like that was I was shocked New England was favored going into that. I just was really surprised. And I knew Zach, after the way Zach talked on the podcast last week when we previewed that game, I knew Zach was going to want them. So I'm like, well, if I want this game, I better pick it first. So I did, but the Browns just got the absolute crap beat out of them. So that was very disappointing for me.
Hey,
That
Nate's not here, but I'm sure he's happy about that.
yeah, Nate. I didn't get the points on the LockBoard, and Nate's favorite team won. So yeah, Nate's definitely happy about that. But yeah, bad for me. That was easily my worst LockBoard pick of the season. So, but secondly, I went with my Oklahoma City Thunder to beat the Sacramento Kings as a 3-point play. I've been very surprised at how my Thunder have been doing. They've been on the upswing, and like Zach talks about when he picks games, he likes to look at the trends. And going into the game, the Thunder had won 3 in a row. The Kings had lost 3 in a row. So with the game being in OKC, I was kind of surprised Sacramento was a heavy favorite. So I took that, and it took a last-second steal and score to get the win, but the Thunder did win that game and got me 3 points. So that was my only correct pick of the week. My final pick of the week was more of a attempt to be aggressive and kind of just throw a dart at the wall and see what happens kind of a thing. I took Washington State over Oregon as a 5-point play. Oregon was a 2-touchdown favorite in that game, but Washington State had been playing pretty well. And while Oregon had been winning, they were seemingly kind of struggling to win against some of these more inferior teams. So I was like, hey, let me just take a shot at this and see if it happens and get me 5 points. But it didn't work out. Washington State lost by like 2 touchdowns, I think. So 3 points for me, not the best week, but again, I got some points, so I can't complain. Connor, you had the second pick. I'll let you talk about your games.
Yeah, so the best week in the LockBoard I've had since like week 2, probably week 2 or week 3, somewhere way back when. But I actually managed to get 2 picks right this week. My first pick, I was really glad I was able to get it. I was hoping that Eric wasn't going to take it, and I saw that he was taking Cleveland, so I was like, all right, I'm going to get this. It was Baylor over Oklahoma, and I had been thinking all year and saying all year that Oklahoma's going to lose at some point, and I thought this has to be the time, especially since Oklahoma was favored by a good amount. It was a 3-point play that they were going to go into Waco and have to play Baylor, who's the number 13 team. I thought that would be a really good opportunity, and sure enough, Baylor came out with the win. It was a very low-scoring game, which was surprising. The Big 12 is not really known for good defenses, but Baylor was able to do it, and it was really fun seeing Lincoln Riley absolutely melt down at the end of that game. And also that it dashes pretty much any hopes of Oklahoma making the college football playoff at this point. So that was good all around. And then my second pick was a bit more of a one of my normal, usual, unfortunate defeats here. LSU over Arkansas. I thought, Arkansas had been very disappointing, and they were going to have to go into Death Valley and play LSU. So I thought that'd be good for a 2-point play. Unfortunately, LSU did lose in overtime. They threw an interception in the end zone on their possession in overtime, so that was unfortunate. And then, obviously, at that point, all Arkansas needed was a field goal. So they were able to get that, unfortunately. Apparently, it's the first time that Arkansas has beaten LSU since 2015, so, good for them, bad for me. Then with my last pick, kind of like Eric, taking his OKC Thunder, I took my Charlotte Hornets over the New York Knicks. Charlotte had been coming off a pretty bad road trip. They lost to pretty much every single team in the Pacific Division over the course of that road trip. But they were starting to get things turned around after that. They took the Lakers to overtime, and then they were able to beat the Grizzlies on the road. So I thought they had a good chance to, take this one against the Knicks at home. And sure enough, they were able to do it, led by some good shooting from Kelly Oubre near the end of the game. And also Miles Bridges looking pretty good. They managed to stop Kemba Walker's revenge path. Managed to stop it right in its tracks. Kemba Walker is going to have to wait a little bit longer to get his first win against Charlotte as a New York Knick. And, listen, I thought Charlotte was coming on the up and up, and they actually managed to end the Warriors' 7-game win streak tonight. So, go Hornets. But that was good for me. So I was able to come away with the most points in the week, which, has been a rare thing for me recently. So,
yeah. And now you have the privilege now of drafting last in the next.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it seems to be working out for most people. So,
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it never works out for me.
So Nate's not here. He picked Minnesota Golden Gophers over Iowa. That was incorrect. He had Seahawks over Packers. Obviously incorrect on that one. And then he had the Jags over the Colts. Also incorrect. Although I would have, been very okay if that had gone green. But it's always little disappointing when you see someone else pick your favorite team to win. But I'll go ahead and share my picks now. I had with my first round Ole Miss over Texas A&M as a 2-pointer. Felt really confident about this one. Texas A&M is kind of a team all over the place, and Ole Miss, I'm a fan of their offense and how they play as a team. So I thought they had a real good shot at that, and they did. They won pretty easily. This next pick didn't go as well, kind of like Eric's first pick with the Browns and Patriots, the other big blowout of the week. I had the Falcons over the Cowboys. Falcons coming off a win last week, Cowboys coming off a loss. I thought, oh, okay, that means the Falcons have a legit chance. It was a 5-pointer, so high risk, high reward sort of pick. But foolishly, I picked the Falcons, and that obviously showed itself. And then in the last round, I picked the Eagles over the Broncos. Not that I necessarily thought the Eagles are that much of a better team. I just feel like 2 points there, and the Broncos, I think, were a bit overrated. So I was like, all right, give me the Eagles. I think I picked the Eagles another week, and they almost won for me. It was unfortunate they didn't, but this time they did. So fly, Eagles, fly. I won't say that.
Boo.
Last time I did that,
Susan's gonna want to reach across this phone screen and slap you for
that. I will say you're talking in a call with a Steelers fan and a Cowboys fan over there, so that's not a good thing to be singing.
Yeah, well,
our listener Joseph,
they
they'll
don't
be happy
care
with you
at all.
for that one. He's an Eagles fan, so he'll like that you did that. But
Sean Morgan will like it too. So there you go.
Everybody else though, it's a no.
You know what? What's the great thing though? True Philly. I'm not a Philly fan, obviously, but true Philly fans, they wouldn't care at all. Like they would not care.
True Philadelphia fans booed Santa Claus, so
Yeah,
that's Eagles fans for you.
All right, so let's go ahead and go around the hoop now. And for around the hoop to end the show, I thought about different things we could talk about around the NBA right now. But to me, what I've kind of seen, here's the thing: is like the NFL has had its controversies this season for sure. John Gruden, Henry Ruggs, Aaron Rodgers, all this
Washington
stuff.
football team.
Washington football team. There you go. That's another one. I'm sure there's more I'm even forgetting, but Urban Meyer.
Oh
but,
God.
Sorry. But the NBA is not alone in this. There's controversies going on in the NBA right now as well. And I've kind of divided these as some on the court and some off the court controversies. And I'll go ahead and start with the on the court. So this past week, really some ugly events took place on the court. We saw two, one I would say is like a scuffle. The Miles Turner, Rudy Gobert scuffle, basically caused by Gobert. Felt like he was fouled, kind of went to the ground and brought Miles Turner down with him. Miles Turner looked at the ref and was like, "You didn't call a penalty for that." And then he kind of gave Gobert a shove, and Gobert came in and hugged him and tried to wrestle with him, basically. And then both the benches got up and everyone started getting all up in arms. It took a big delay, probably suspensions for lots of people and fines and everything. So real big, scuffle in an event in a game, which that happens, it's nothing new or anything. But the fact that it also took place the same week, I think it's the next day, from the Jokic and Morris scuffle that happened with the Nuggets and the Heat. So,
It's a great picture you got right there. I like seeing his face like,
And Jokic is like, whoo. I love it.
Basically, Morris on the Heat, he did something to Jokic, like some small, like, dirty or something. I forget what it was, like a shove.
Jokic was, I think he was trying to shoot like a half-court shot at the buzzer or something, and like as he was going to shoot it, Morris like hip checked him or something, or kind of bunned him from the side. That was what started that.
That's what started it. So Jokic was not happy with that because the refs didn't say anything. And then Morris isn't looking, he's just walking off. And then Jokic, you can see it kind of in his eyes. He's like, he had enough, and he just snapped. And he runs over and just puts his shoulder into Morris, knocks him to the ground, totally caught off guard by that. And then, of course, the Heat players in his defense come up and, get into Jokic's face, and the Nuggets players come and get in their faces. And, similar sort of deal. Morris looked like he was, injured from that. And Jokic got a suspension, ejected, all that jazz. But what do you guys think this is the question I'll ask is, do you guys think this is nothing, or do you think this is a result of referees being more hands off this year? And you're seeing, like, you saw it with the Turner Gobert thing, where it's like, he thought there was a foul committed against him, and then there was no punishment, so he kind of took it in his own hands and then went and started an attack. And that's kind of happened in both cases here. Do you guys think it's that? Do you think it's isolated? Do you think this is a trend we keep seeing? I guess, Eric, I'll start with you.
I think this is more of an isolated thing. I don't look into it too much. I mean, every year in the NBA, there's always, games where players are getting into scuffles or like fake fights where they act like they Jalen Ramsey it and act like they're going to do something, but they don't. It's just
just remembering that episode where we talked about the whole thing between him and Marcus Peters, and Jalen Ramsey was like, "Oh, you want to go? You want to go?" And Marcus Peters was like, "Yeah, let's go." And Jalen,
they're holding me back, man. They're holding me back.
Yeah, and Jalen Ramsey's like backing away as he's like, "We want to go."
Yeah, because I mean, especially with like the Morris and Jokic one, I mean, Morris just kind of cowardly shoved him and won that shot, which was really dumb. He had no need to do that. And then Jokic like waited till Morris turned around and was walking away before he ran up and shoved him. So I don't know. These guys sometimes act like they're super tough and all this, but then nothing ever happens. I don't know. Maybe we got like 2 East and 2 West teams here. I would get a pay-per-view though to see like Markieff Morris and Rudy and Miles Turner versus Jokic and Gobert or something. Give me a.
I think I know who wins that fight.
Have you seen Jokic and others too? Because there was like Jimmy Butler said like, "We'll meet you guys in the parking lot," and then Jokic's brothers like they came out, and I don't know if you've seen them.
I mean, does
and all that?
My thing is like, does anyone actually want to take on Jokic? Like,
I don't know, man. It's just I think it's just a whole lot of nothing, in my opinion. Now, if this like keeps happening every game where this is happening, then this could turn into a problem. But I just, these guys obviously all have big egos, and they have these heated moments, and I don't think it's necessarily because of how the officials are calling the games. I mean, this seems to happen every year, at least a few times. So for me, this stuff isn't really a big deal as long as it doesn't start happening every game or something. Connor, do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. These players have big egos, and they said they want to act tough, but they're really not, or something like that. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, it could be. I would think a little bit more that they could be getting like frustrated with the officiating, just because. I mean, that would be a thing for a whole nother episode. But the officiating across like sports these days has been kind of bad. I think kind of bad is being a little nice.
Yeah, that's being generous.
I was about to say the officiating has kind of gone downhill recently. I mean, I'm one of those people that I'm all for, like, you want to have the human element and stuff, but almost making me feel like sometimes we just need to have computers ref these things and, always get these calls right, because I feel like the human error is happening more often. So I get being frustrated by the referees. But yeah, I agree with Eric. It's probably isolated. I don't see this happening really too often. I think in the NBA, like, I don't know. I feel like the NBA is one of those sports that, like, players, if you want to talk about big egos in sports, I think their egos are the biggest of any sport. Like, there's some pretty big egos in the NFL too, but I think the NBA by far has the biggest egos. So, these players, they're good.
Like, you think
Yeah.
that's why?
Oh, well, sorry. What did you say?
I was saying because they make the most money out of all the sports, like average.
Yeah, I mean, they make the most money, and I mean, if you just look at some of these players, like, they have definitely some of the strongest personalities. I mean, if you just look at, the NBA's poster boy, LeBron James, like, his ego is the biggest on the planet. So, I mean, it's, when you're when your face, has an ego the size of LeBron James's, then it's going to trickle down. At least in the NFL, like, as much as I hate Tom Brady, like, he doesn't really have the biggest ego per se. So, maybe that is, it doesn't trickle down as much as it does with, like, LeBron James in the NBA. So it's going to happen. And, who knows? Maybe I'd be all for, this is one of the reasons why I like hockey. Fights are legal in hockey. So I don't know. Maybe someone needs to start legalizing fights in the NBA. But,
yeah, let them go at it and see, like, who really does have the balls,
Yeah, I mean, I was about to say.
Because they're all like, oh, you want to go? Like, who has,
right. I mean,
who has the balls to actually throw a punch or take a punch,
Yeah, that's why I always like about hockey. Like, if two guys want to go at it, then, like, they let them go at it, because it's like, all right, are you want to prove that you're tough? Then prove that you're tough, because it is funny too. I mean, you see it in the NHL where you have these people that'll, like, because the same thing happens. Like, these players will act tough and, like, they look tough and they want to go, like, oh yeah, you want to go, but then they won't drop their gloves. It's like, okay, like, yeah, sure, whatever. If you really had the balls, then you would have dropped the gloves with me, but you're not going to. So, I don't know. That's a different topic, though. I'm getting off topic.
Hey, it was fun though.
Yeah, I just think personally, 2 of these in 1 week, I think it is, or I think the NBA is going to react. I think you are going to see. I think there's going to be like a memo or something to the referees, like, hey, if you see, something ticky tacky, like, call it now. Like, I do think that
and
there
I
is.
think, are they going to have an emphasis on something? Like, the NFL's got the emphasis on taunting, and the NHL's got the emphasis on cross-checking this year. Like, is the NBA going to have an emphasis on, like, ticky-tack calls?
Yeah, the NBA's emphasis so far has been not as many free throws and not as many of those shooting fouls.
Yeah, that's right. I remember seeing, famous Twitter user Bulls Got Next. He keeps I kept seeing a lot of tweets from him complaining about how Harden wasn't getting the fouls he usually gets.
Yeah,
so
that's a big emphasis.
Yeah,
that's
a good thing. That's a good thing. Like, I'm fine with less fouls. No one wants to see 55 free throws a game between both teams and just running in and flailing around. And so I like that stuff.
Oh, he touched me. Oh,
he took a breath on me. He found, like, no.
But I'm James Harden.
Yeah, exactly, dude.
All right, so that's the on the court controversy. There's some pretty big off the court ones too, which I'll get into first. And unfortunately, this is bad Trailblazers news. So, not off to the greatest start record wise, and also off the court, lots of turmoil, mystery going on, a lot of uncertainty, I should say, going on with the team. And this is still an ongoing thing. So it's like right now we don't know the answers to everything, but basically, in summary, what's happened is their team CEO, Chris McGowan, he resigned this past week out of the blue, just resigned. And then also it was reported that Neil Olshey, the GM of the team, has been the GM for a while now. He survived the firing of the head coach, the Terry Stotts firing. He's still the GM. He's always been seen as like a cold figure, and none of the Portland fans, for the most part, like Olshey. I think more people like Stotts. Stotts was a good human sort of thing. Olshay's seen as like a rat sort of a deal. Like,
like that. I was like, where's this going? It's like, oh.
no, I mean that's what I would say. It's like
I know. It was just funny. I was like, where's this going? Like he was seen as a good human, and then, like this is like a seen as a
like
rat.
And then Olshay's like a rat, like just a rat on the team. Real bad with the media, that sort of guy. But like he, as a GM, he had his good and his bad. But basically, the reason he's being brought up into this is because he's being investigated for like workplace harassment or something like that. Hostile work environment is what they're calling it. So it's like that can't be good. Like, whenever you're being under investigation for stuff like that, it's never good. And then you have the CEO resigning the same week and out of the blue. And there's a couple theories. He hasn't really said why he's resigning, but from what I've gathered, it's really like a power struggle sort of thing with him. And he wasn't getting the control that he previously had wanted. So Jody Allen, who's the team's owner, took over when Paul Allen, the former owner, died. So Paul Allen, a couple of years ago died, passed along to Jody. Jody's much more of a hands-off owner, whereas Paul was much more, living and breathing with the team sort of a thing. And Paul really liked McGowan. He was his handpicked guy, and McGowan was like his golden boy. Like he was in charge of like all of his, not all of his, sports stuff, but like he was involved in other, sports associations that Paul Allen had, not just Trailblazers related. So when Jody Allen took over, that sort of stuff, he kind of lost that responsibility. This season, I know the Trailblazers are having, not as high of attendance. Their attendance has been down this year. There's, the team hasn't been off to a great start. Like there's lots of problems going on with the team, and it's just bad to see this happen. It's never good mid-season to see your team CEO leave. I know this isn't like, this is why this is the off the court stuff. Like this is, it's a CEO, someone you wouldn't really think about, but still, it's not good. It's adding dysfunction anytime you see major management like this leave. And so I'm really worried about where the team goes with this. And then even more importantly, team related, like Olshay, what's going to happen with this workplace harassment? Who else is involved? How deep is this going to go? Is it going to be a case where it's like, he was misogynistic or racist or something like that? Like
John Gruden stuff.
John Gruden stuff. Like, is he going to be forced out in an ugly exit? And then what's going to happen? Who's going to replace him as GM? Like Chauncey Billups is like, he just got here like yesterday, and now he's like the one in charge of everything, basically, is what it seems like. So it's crazy. The Blazers are going through a very tumultuous time right now, and probably out of all the teams, definitely have the most like controversy, uncertainty hanging around them. But just wanted to fill everybody in on that story. And then also lastly here, I'll just talk about this one for a brief second, because I know this episode's gone on a little long, but Robert Sarver, the Philadelphia Suns owner,
Phoenix Suns.
What did I just say?
You said Philadelphia Suns.
Yeah, you did.
See, this is what happens.
Going on for a while,
Go on for a long time. But anyways, Suns owner, he's like under investigation or whatnot for saying similar thing, racist, misogynistic comments. I don't know where this one's heading. I mean, nobody does really, but I guess I'll just talk about the what ifs. Like, we'll go to Eric. If this is all true, how badly is this going to impact the Suns? And then Connor, if this, is debunked and whatnot, like what sort of an impact would that be? So I guess Eric, we'll start with the worst case scenario. And,
yeah, I mean, worst case
true.
scenario, if this is true, I mean, I know, God, I can't remember his name, but I remember the old
Donald Sterling.
the Clippers owner.
Yeah, Donald
Yeah,
Sterling.
Yeah, Donald. Yeah, he had to sell the team. So, I don't know if this is going to be as serious as that, but I mean, if it's worst case scenario, if that's what we're talking, then that would obviously be it. I mean, if he were to have to sell the team, I mean, that would just be insane. So obviously, like, the investigation still has to go on, and this still has to be proven and everything. But and obviously, I guess it'll also depend on how severe is it. Like, would it be that severe where that would be where he would have to sell the team, or would he just be heavily fined, or draft picks taken away? What would they do? But I don't know. I haven't heard about this one as much as I have the Blazers one, so I don't fully know what's going on here. But yeah, that would be the worst case scenario there, I would think. But Connor, what about you? Like, on with the questions Zach gave you?
I mean, I feel like if it's debunked, then I mean, I feel like just it's going to be forgotten about. I mean, I feel like that's kind of the way these things go. Like, there's a lot of media and speculation, and then obviously, if it does come to fruition that this is true, then there's more stuff that happens. But like usually when it's been debunked, it just kind of goes away. Like everyone just kind of, especially for someone like him who's got as much money as he does, like it's not really going to affect him that much. There's always going to kind of be like this, thing kind of hovering over him, like oh, like people are still going to call him a racist and whatnot, just to be like take a stab at him. Like people always do that for like Ben Roethlisberger. They always like to call him a rapist, even though he got both of those cases got dismissed because like they were proven to be false, but people still say that. So but other than that, like I said, it's just kind of gonna go away if it gets debunked. But I really think the John Gruden thing is really just kind of like, it's having a carryover effect. A lot of like the NBA and the NFL are really starting to look more into these sort of things and being like, oh yeah, like, maybe we should take this more seriously and, really start to, especially the NBA, as hard as they push that platform of, I mean, like they were pushing it hard during the pandemic with the whole, Black Lives Matter movement and all that stuff, with how hard they're pushing it, then they really should be, if something like this is going on, really taking it seriously. So, and it seems like they're starting to do that. So it's just something like, especially I think, like I said, if it gets debunked, I don't think anything will happen. But especially if it is true, then I don't know if that's going to start triggering like a lot more investigations, because if it is proven to be true, not only, like I said, we have John Gruden and now we have him. There's going to be a lot more things going around, and I think you're going to start seeing more people come out and start like because I'm sure it's probably happening in places that we're not even thinking of, but all it takes is that one person to actually get some sort of penalty for it, and now all of a sudden you open the gates for everything else. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But like I said, back to Zach's question, if it gets debunked, it's just going to go away. Nothing's going to happen.
All right, yeah, that's gonna wrap up the Around the Hoop in this episode. Good talk on all the topics, guys. Really enjoyed it, and I believe Connor's hosting next episode, so make sure to stay tuned for that. Follow us on all the socials at Clutch Crew Sport on Twitter, and until then, guys, remember, be clutch.
Bye.
Peace.